Aid agencies are warning of an increasing risk of famine in Gaza, with more than 90% of the population now deemed to be at least at a crisis level. Now, that's the third phase of the IPC's Global Food and Security Scale, with phase 5 classified as famine. That level is already being experienced by a quarter of the population in northern Gaza. The others there also fall into emergency or crisis levels of food insecurity. 15% of internally displaced people in Gaza are already in famine. Nearly half are estimated to be experiencing emergency levels of hunger, huge amounts. Now, in the south, 15% of people are living in stressed levels of food insecurity. That's the second phase on the scale. The rest are experiencing crisis, emergency, or famine levels of hunger. Well, let's bring in Michael Fakhri. He's the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food and a professor of law at Oregon University. He joins us now from Eugene in Oregon. Michael, this word famine, it's obviously a technical term. It has very specific connotations. So a certain proportion of children, for instance, need to be dying in order for it to be used. We know that that is now happening in parts of Gaza, but I wonder if a technical threshold like this can be a bit of a distraction. I mean, this is a graded scale, right? The level of starvation below famine is still profound.
Thank you, Nastasia. No, I think you're quite right in terms of course, there's a technical definition. It measures the number of people affected. It looks for 1 out of 3 children being acutely malnourished. But ultimately, what famine means is a significant increase of rate of people dying from hunger and malnutrition. And the challenge is, how do you measure that in the midst of a war?
Yeah.
So what we're hearing is, yes, there's a significant risk of famine, but now I'm wondering, are we actually in a famine? It's unclear. So what is clear is that all children under the age of 5 in Gaza, so that's 335 children, are not getting enough nutrition. That means they're all at the risk of permanent physical and cognitive impairment, what doctors call stunting. Their future is at stake.
Michael, I want to talk about the speed and the scale of this. We keep hearing the word unprecedented, but I wonder if you can help us put this in context. There have been famines declared in places like Somalia, Yemen, Ethiopia that got a lot of publicity. How does this compare?
Right, and I'm always careful not to compare different famines. Every catastrophe and every atrocity is has its own dynamic. What's unique about this one has been the speed and how complete. We've never seen 2.2 million civilians made to go hungry within weeks. So we've never seen this degree of hunger used as a weapon so quickly and so completely, ever.
Michael, you said that it's being used as a weapon. So the pattern of Israeli attacks, the barring of food aid, in your mind, that tells us about the intent here.
Well, exactly. To understand how did this happen so quickly, it doesn't happen by chance. Starvation, wherever it happens, is always the result of political choices. And this is the same case here. So first, Israel declared a siege on October 9th and immediately implemented a siege. Now, which meant they blocked all food, water, fuel, and medicine to civilians. Now we're seeing a trickle of humanitarian relief make its way in. But what we're hearing from UN agencies is that humanitarian relief is not reaching most of Gaza, so it's not enough. So the current siege is one cause, but this is also an ongoing problem. There was a 16-year blockade before this. So even before the war, half of people in Gaza were food insecure and 80% depended on aid. So already Israel made the situation precarious through a blockade. Then it imposes a siege during the war. Then it destroys civilian infrastructure. So Israel has destroyed hospitals, homes, roads, making everyday life impossible. And finally, what I'm receiving reports is the destruction of the food system itself. Meaning, Israel has destroyed approximately 22% of agricultural land. It's destroyed 70% of fishing boats and has denied fishers access to the sea. So even if Gazans wanted to feed themselves, Israel is destroying their food system. So you put all of these combined, this is why we're seeing this risk of famine happen so quickly.
Michael, from what you're saying, it sounds like you believe that this is systematic. We've also seen the destruction of farms and attacks on farmers in the occupied West Bank. What, in your mind, is Israel's aim here?
I mean, their declared aim has been to push out Palestinians out of Gaza. They've said as much in black and white terms. They've used dehumanizing language. They've called the Palestinian people animals, and they've targeted civilians simply because they're Palestinian. And their aim is, again, from what we keep hearing, and in black and white terms, this is not reading between the lines. It sounds like to occupy Gaza even more and to push out Palestinians as much as possible.
Michael, you are the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food. What can the UN do right now other than ask Israel to let more food in?
I mean, through formal channels, we've seen everything. We've seen the Security Council. We've seen the Secretary General. We've seen the General Assembly. We've yet to hear from the Human Rights Council. Before we turn to the UN, I think people on the streets have the answer. Millions of people are marching in the streets demanding an end to the war and immediate humanitarian relief. It's now time for the governments to work together through the UN and to put real pressure on Israel. Its allies have done nothing to prevent this risk of famine and this risk of genocide. So now it's time for people to continue pressuring their governments and for governments to economically pressure Israel, to diplomatically pressure Israel, and politically pressure Israel to stop this famine.
We've spoken a lot here, Michael, about intent. As many aid agencies have pointed out, the use of starvation as a weapon of war is a war crime. So what sort of accountability can there be? Will there be?
To call it a war crime in legal terms, what that means is we can try and hold individuals accountable through international criminal courts, through International Court of Justice, through national courts. The problem of focusing on international laws of war is it's often after the fact, after the fighting ends, and it goes after individuals. And it still allows, the laws of war still allow for killing of people, and Israel will make the argument that it is out of military necessity that it is starving people. And that's a legal argument it's allowed to make. Now, time will tell whether that is factually true or not. But I think what's actually more important to frame it back as a human rights concern, there's a risk of genocide. We've seen genocide actually unfolding, and there's no exception to genocide. There's no exception to targeting and killing Palestinians simply because they're Palestinian.
Michael Fakhri there, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food. Thank you so much for joining us on Al Jazeera, sir.
Thank you very much.